Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. He bought a house to forget her and found her living next door. The realtor had promised him peace, quiet, and a view of the lake. That was all Ethan Cole wanted after the divorce silence. The kind of silence that could drown out the echo of her laughter, the arguments that burned through their final months, and the empty ring box that still sat in his drawer. The deal closed fast, faster than he had expected. The key was cold in his hand, a fresh start wrapped in polished wood and still air. As he pulled into the driveway, the evening sun brushed against the lake's surface, throwing gold across the water. He exhaled for the first time in months. Maybe this was a place where he could stop remembering. Then, as he stepped out of the car, he froze. There was movement next door. A woman in faded jeans and a loose sweater was kneeling in the garden, untangling a string of lights. The tilt of her head, the curve of her wrist, the familiar mess of auburn hair, the world tilted. Harper. She looked up, just as stunned. For a second, neither of them spoke. The last time they saw each other, they were signing divorce papers in a downtown office, too proud to look back. Now, a fence barely waist-high stood between them. Ethan, she breathed, half whisper, half disbelief. He swallowed, gripping his car keys like armor. Harper. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing, she said, standing slowly, brushing soil from her hands. I rented this place last month. A pause stretched between them, long enough for a breeze to move the wind chime by her porch. It sounded like something from a life they had both tried to bury. Ethan forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. Guess fate likes irony. She gave a soft, humorless laugh. Relax. I am just your neighbor, not your ghost. Then she turned and disappeared into her house, leaving him staring at the closed door. Inside his chest, something twisted, the ache of recognition mixed with the sting of regret. He had bought this house to forget her. Now she was 20 feet away. That night, Ethan unpacked boxes in silence. The house was beautiful, almost too perfect: high ceilings, oak floors, a fireplace that smelled faintly of cedar. But every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant music from next door, pulled him back to what he thought he had buried. Through the kitchen window, he could see Harper's lights flicker on. She was still awake. Probably writing, he thought. She had always written at night, claiming the dark helped her think. He wondered if she was writing about him now. He looked down at the stack of papers on his table, the new business contract he had to review for Monday. Work. That was the reason he was here. To rebuild. To prove to everyone, including himself, that he was fine. But as the night deepened and the lake turned black outside his window, he realized that forgetting her might not be as easy as changing his address. Some ghosts, it seemed, had a forwarding address too. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds, spilling across the half-unpacked boxes in Ethan's living room. He had slept restlessly, haunted by the image of Harper's face just a few feet away across the fence. The coffee pot gurgled as he stared out the kitchen window, catching a glimpse of her again. She was on her porch, holding a notebook, her hair pulled into a loose bun. She looked peaceful, almost like the woman he had fallen in love with years ago, before pride, before ambition, before silence grew between them. He turned away, muttering to himself, "Forget it, Ethan. It is just proximity. Nothing more." But the lie rang hollow in the quiet house. His phone buzzed with a reminder: meeting with the development board at 11. He forced his mind back to work. He was building a new startup, a fresh project meant to distract him, to prove he was still in control. Yet every time he closed his laptop, his eyes drifted toward the house next door. Harper had spent most of the morning outside, sketching, rewriting, and sipping coffee from the same chipped mug she used to keep in their old apartment. Around noon, she walked toward his fence. "Hey," she said softly, her voice polite but uncertain, "I figured we should set some boundaries." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "Boundaries?" "Yes," she said, trying to sound casual. "We do not want awkward misunderstandings. We both came here for peace, right?" He nodded slowly. "Right." She handed him a piece of paper with a small list written in her neat handwriting. Rule number 1: do not mention the past. Rule number 2: do not interfere with each other's personal life. Rule number 3: no visits after 9. Rule number 4: if neighbors ask, say we are just old friends. Ethan scanned it and let out a quiet laugh. "Feels like a contract." Harper met his eyes for a second, the corner of her mouth lifting. "It is easier when things are written down." He signed it without hesitation. "Fine. A clean start." For a moment, they both stood there, the paper between them fluttering slightly in the breeze. Then she nodded and turned away, disappearing back into her house. The faint sound of her door clicking shut felt louder than it should have. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the lake, Ethan went for a walk. The neighborhood was calm, lined with tall pines and the faint smell of rain from the afternoon drizzle. A few houses down, children were playing catch. He envied their easy laughter, the simplicity of joy untouched by regret. When he returned, Harper's porch light was on again. Through the window, he saw her typing, her face illuminated by the soft glow of her screen. It hit him then she had always been the writer, the dreamer, the one who found beauty in broken things. He had been the one who built walls instead of bridges. Later that night, thunder rolled across the sky and rain began to fall hard against the roof. A sudden flicker cut the lights across the street. Moments later, his house went dark. Ethan fumbled for his phone's flashlight, muttering under his breath. Then, a knock echoed from the front door. He opened it to find Harper standing there, rain dripping from her sweater, a candle in her hand. "Power is out on the whole block," she said, her voice half apology, half nervous laugh. "I thought maybe you could use some light." Ethan hesitated before stepping aside. "Come in." For a long second, they stood in the dim glow of the single flame, the air heavy with memories. "You did not have to," he said quietly. Harper shrugged. Old habits die hard. The candlelight danced between them, catching the gold in her eyes. He wanted to say 100 things to ask if she was happy, if she still blamed him, if she ever thought of what they lost, but the words refused to come. Instead, he just said, "Thank you." She smiled faintly, setting the candle on his table. "You are welcome, neighbor." And then she was gone, leaving him alone in the flickering light, holding a silence that felt almost like hope. The storm lasted through the night, turning the world outside into a blur of rain and wind. By morning, the sky cleared to a quiet blue, the kind that made the lake shimmer like glass. Ethan woke early, drawn by the smell of damp earth and the faint scent of coffee drifting through the open window from next door. He caught himself smiling before shaking his head. Boundaries, Ethan. Remember the list. He spent the morning on video calls, closing minor deals, pretending that the candlelit visit from Harper had not stirred something old inside him. But it had. Every pause in his day was filled with the echo of her voice, soft and steady in the dark. By afternoon, he needed air. He stepped outside, notebook in hand, pretending to check the roof after the storm. That was when he saw her again. Harper was kneeling by the garden fence, repairing a broken stake. Her hair was damp from the mist, and she wore his old college sweatshirt, the one she must have kept all these years. The sight hit him like a punch and a hug all at once. "You kept that?" he asked, leaning against the fence. She looked up, startled, then smiled faintly. "It is comfortable. Besides, you left it behind." "Guess I did." He paused, then added, "It looks better on you anyway." Harper laughed quietly, shaking her head. You always were terrible at small talk. The tension between them softened like the air before spring rain. For a while, they just talked about the storm, about the lake, about how quiet life could be when no one was watching. It was the first real conversation they had shared since their divorce, and it felt strangely easy. But the peace did not last long. A voice called from across the yard. Ethan Cole. It was Linda, the neighborhood association chair, carrying a clipboard and a bright smile. You are both just who I needed. We are hosting a community dinner this weekend, and we want all new residents to join. Couples are especially encouraged. Ethan's heart dropped. He opened his mouth to explain, but Harper spoke first. Of course, we would love to, she said smoothly, before he could stop her. Linda beamed. Wonderful. We will count on you too. Friday at 7. When the woman left, Ethan turned to Harper, half amused, half incredulous. What was that? She raised an eyebrow. Damage control. You really want to be the subject of gossip before you even settle in? So now we are pretending to be a couple again? Just for one dinner, she said, arms crossed. We have done worse, remember? He sighed but could not help the small smile tugging at his mouth. You are unbelievable. You used to like that about me. The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. The next few days passed in quiet anticipation. Ethan found himself glancing at the clock more often, wondering what she would wear, what she would say. When Friday came, he stood outside her door in a navy suit, hands shoved in his pockets. Harper opened the door in a soft blue dress, her hair falling over her shoulders. For a second, the world stopped. You clean up well, she said lightly. You too, he managed. The dinner was held in a neighbor's backyard, string lights glowing above long wooden tables. People laughed, clinked glasses, shared stories. Ethan and Harper played their parts, smiles, small touches, gentle teasing. To everyone else, they looked like a couple perfectly in sync. But beneath the surface, something real began to stir. Halfway through the evening, a man approached them. You two seem happy, he said. How long have you been married? Ethan hesitated. Harper looked at him, waiting. Then, for reasons he could not explain, he said, 5 years. And somehow, she still puts up with me. The table laughed. Harper's eyes softened, surprised but not angry. When the night ended, they walked home side by side in comfortable silence. At her porch, she stopped, turning to him. That was convincing, she said. You were convincing, he replied. The porch light flickered above them, painting her face in gold. Maybe we are both better actors than we thought. Or maybe, he said quietly, we just stopped pretending for a few hours. Harper's breath caught, but she said nothing. She only smiled, stepped back, and whispered, "Good night, neighbor." And for the first time in a long while, Ethan realized he was not ready for the night to end. The next morning, Ethan found himself standing at his front door, staring at the small piece of paper still taped to his fridge, the one titled Boundaries. The ink had faded a little, the edges curling from the damp air after the storm. He almost laughed at how useless it seemed now. Boundaries were meant to keep people apart, but somehow, every rule they had written was already broken. He poured himself coffee and looked outside. Harper was on her porch again, barefoot, hair tied back, humming quietly as she typed on her laptop. He caught himself watching her for too long. When she noticed, she gave a faint smile and waved. He waved back, then turned away quickly, feeling something stir that he was not ready to name. The neighborhood dinner had changed something between them. The easy laughter, the pretend touches that no longer felt like pretending, the way her hand brushed his arm when she thanked someone, it had all blurred the lines. Later that afternoon, there was a soft knock at his door. When he opened it, Harper stood there holding a plate of cookies. "Peace offering," she said. "For roping you into that dinner." Ethan grinned. "If this is your version of punishment, I think I can survive." They sat on his porch steps, sharing cookies and stories about the neighbors. The sky turned a mellow orange, and the lake shimmered in the distance. "You know," she said after a while, "I was terrified to move here. I thought I was running from everything. Turns out I just ran in a circle." Ethan nodded. "I get it. I bought this house to forget you. Instead, I found you next door." She smiled softly, eyes glistening in the fading light. Fate has a cruel sense of humor. They both laughed, and for the first time in years, it did not hurt to remember. Over the next few days, their paths crossed more often: morning jogs along the lake, late-night grocery runs, shared hellos that lasted a little longer each time. One evening, Ethan saw her struggling to carry a box of books from her car. He rushed over instinctively. "Let me help," he said, taking the box from her arms. "I have got it, really," she protested, but her tone was half-hearted. They placed the box on her living room floor, surrounded by open notebooks, sketches, and coffee mugs. The place smelled like paper, ink, and something floral. "You are still writing," he said. "Always," she replied. "It is the only thing that makes sense when nothing else does." Ethan looked around, then noticed a familiar manuscript title on her desk: The House by the Lake. "Is that about," he began. "Us?" Harper's expression froze. "It is fiction," she said quickly. "Mostly." Silence hung heavy. He nodded slowly, not pressing further. As he turned to leave, she called after him. "Ethan?" He looked back. "I did not mean to hurt you back then. I just did not know how to stay." His voice was low when he answered. "And I did not know how to fight for you." Their eyes met, both full of memories and things left unsaid. Later that night, thunder rolled again, though the rain never came. Ethan sat by the window, unable to sleep. He could see her light still on next door. She was pacing, phone pressed to her ear, looking worried. Moments later, she stepped outside, scanning the street. He opened his window slightly. "Everything okay?" he called. She looked up, startled but relieved. "My mom is sick," she said quietly. "I just got a call from the hospital in Denver." "Do you need a ride to the airport?" he asked immediately. She hesitated, then nodded. "Please." Within an hour, they were on the road, headlights cutting through the dark highway. The silence between them was calm now, not heavy. When they reached the terminal, Harper turned to him. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything. Just text me when you land," he said. "And Harper, take care of her." She smiled faintly. "You never stopped being kind." She disappeared into the terminal crowd, leaving Ethan standing by the curb, the night wind brushing against his face. As he drove home alone, he realized that maybe forgetting was never the goal. Maybe this was how healing began, not by erasing the past, but by finding peace in its presence. The days after Harper left felt long and muted. Ethan tried to fill them with work, meetings, and empty routines, but the house seemed quieter than ever. The mug she had used was still by the sink. The faint scent of her perfume lingered near the porch, where they used to sit. Each evening, he found himself staring across the fence, half expecting her light to flicker on again. Weeks passed, and summer settled in. The lake glowed silver under the moonlight, and the neighborhood moved on, but Ethan's world felt stuck somewhere between memory and longing. One morning, he received a message. It was from Harper. The text was short: "Mom is stable now. I will be back next week. Thank you, Ethan." He stared at the screen for a long time before typing back, "Glad she is okay. Drive safe." When she returned, it was early evening. Her car pulled up quietly, headlights cutting across his driveway. She stepped out, looking tired but peaceful. "Hey," she greeted softly. "Hey," he replied, unable to hide the relief in his voice. "How is your mom?" "Recovering," she said, smiling faintly. "Stronger than I thought." Just like her daughter, he said, and she laughed, a sound that warmed the air between them. Over the following days, they slipped back into the rhythm that had become familiar. Shared morning greetings, quick chats at the fence, the occasional dinner invitation that neither of them called a date. One Saturday, Harper appeared at his door holding a box. "Need help carrying this?" she asked, grinning. Inside were old photos, manuscripts, and a single-framed picture of their wedding day. Ethan froze when he saw it. She noticed and said quietly, "I found it while packing. I did not know if I should keep it." He took the frame gently from her hands. "Maybe we both should. It was not all bad, Harper." "No," she said softly. "It was not." They stood there in silence, memories threading through the quiet space like ghosts made of light. Later that week, the community board hosted another event, a local art fair by the lake. Harper was one of the featured writers, reading excerpts from her latest work. Ethan watched from the crowd as she stood on the small stage, her voice steady and calm. The story she read was familiar. It was about two people who had loved, lost, and somehow found their way back to each other, not in the same way, but in a way that made peace possible. When she finished, the audience applauded. Ethan clapped, too, but his chest felt heavy. After the crowd thinned, Harper found him by the dock. "You came," she said, surprised. "Of course," he replied. "It was beautiful." "It was honest," she corrected gently, "maybe too honest." They walked along the water's edge, the sky burning orange above the trees. "I think I am finally done running," Harper said after a while. "From the past." "From you." "From myself." Ethan stopped, turning to face her. "Then maybe it is time we stop pretending this was just coincidence," he said. She smiled faintly. "Coincidence or fate? Does it matter?" he asked. "We are here now." She looked at him, the reflection of the lake shimmering in her eyes. "You think people like us get second chances?" "I think," he said slowly, "some stories just need a different ending." Harper stepped closer, the air between them charged with everything unsaid. But before either could speak, a flash from across the lake caught their attention, a photographer, snapping pictures of the event. A moment later, the whispers began. "Is that Ethan Cole?" someone murmured. "The CEO who vanished after the merger?" Cameras turned their way. Harper tensed, her old instincts kicking in. "Ethan, they are going to twist this." He exhaled sharply. "Let them. I am done hiding." But she shook her head, fear flickering across her face. "You do not understand. They will make it about us, not my work." He stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Then let them. The truth does not need hiding." For a long second, she said nothing, then whispered, "You are impossible." "And you are worth it," he said quietly. The flashbulbs continued to pop, but neither of them moved away. The lake wind swept around them, carrying the sound of applause from the stage behind. Whatever happened next, Ethan knew one thing for certain, was not running anymore. Not from her, not from himself, and not from the story they had both tried to rewrite separately. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The next morning, Ethan woke up to a flood of notifications. His name was trending again, plastered across business headlines and gossip blogs. Photos of him and Harper by the lake were everywhere, headlines twisting their story into something scandalous. Disgraced CEO seen rekindling romance with ex-wife. Was it a publicity stunt? He scrolled through them silently, his chest tightening with every word. For years, he had fought to rebuild his reputation after the fallout of his last company. Now, one quiet evening had turned into another storm. When his phone rang, he already knew who it was. Ethan, his investor's voice came through, clipped and cold. "We cannot afford distractions. Fix this." He closed his eyes. Understood. After the call, he sat there for a long moment before grabbing his keys. Across the fence, Harper was watering her plants, unaware of the chaos spreading online. He walked over slowly. "Harper," he said, his voice low. She looked up and saw his expression. "You saw it, did you not?" He nodded. "They are saying things again. About us. About you." She sighed, setting the watering can aside. "I told you this would happen." "I will handle it," he said quickly. "I will make a statement, clear your name." "No," she interrupted, shaking her head. "That will only feed it. Just let it fade." "It will not fade, Harper. Not this time." "Then what do you suggest?" she asked, crossing her arms. He hesitated. "Come with me to the press conference tonight. Let them hear the truth from both of us." Her eyes widened. "You are serious?" "Ethan, that is madness. I am not built for your world anymore." "You do not have to be," he said softly. "You just have to be honest." Hours later, under the glare of studio lights, they stood side by side at the press table. Cameras flashed. The room buzzed with whispered curiosity. Ethan adjusted the microphone, his voice calm but steady. "For years, I have tried to keep my personal life separate from my work. But I will not let lies define either of us. Harper Brooks is not part of some business strategy or image campaign. She is a person who once believed in me when no one else did. Whatever happened between us is our story, not a headline." The room fell silent. Harper hesitated, then leaned toward the microphone. "We both made mistakes," she said softly. "But sometimes, the hardest stories are the ones worth finishing properly." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the reporters began to murmur again, their tone shifting. Not scandal, curiosity, empathy. After the conference, they slipped out the side exit, walking into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered against the wet pavement. "You did not have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did," he replied. "You spent years protecting my reputation when I did not deserve it. It was time I did the same." She smiled faintly. "You always did have a flair for grand gestures." "Old habits," he said with a small grin. They stopped at a crosswalk, the glow of the traffic light bathing them in red. "What happens now?" she asked. Ethan looked at her, the weight of everything they had been through in his eyes. "Now, we stop pretending this is just circumstance. I do not want to live next door anymore, Harper. I want to live with you." She laughed softly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You are serious, are you not?" "Dead serious." "And if it all falls apart again," she whispered. "Then we rebuild," he said simply. "This time together." The light turned green, and they crossed the street hand in hand, their steps slow, steady, certain. By the time they reached the car, the rain had started again, soft, cleansing. Harper looked up at the sky and whispered, "You know, I think the storm followed us on purpose." Ethan smiled, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "Maybe it is just trying to give us a fresh start." When they drove away, the city behind them faded into a blur of lights, and for the first time in years, neither of them looked back. The world would keep talking, headlines would come and go, but somewhere between the raindrops and the quiet laughter in the car, they both knew this time was different. It was not about forgetting the past. It was about finally forgiving it. The next few weeks passed quietly, almost peacefully. The storm of attention around the press conference began to fade, replaced by genuine curiosity about Ethan's new project and Harper's writing. For the first time in a long while, things felt calm. Ethan spent his mornings by the lake, working remotely from the porch, while Harper wrote from the kitchen table, her words flowing as freely as the sunlight through the windows. Their houses no longer felt separate, they moved between them as if the fence had never existed. One evening, Harper called him out to the yard. "The community board wants us to host the autumn fundraiser," she said, holding the invitation. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You mean the same people who believed we were a scandal last month?" People forgive quickly when there is free wine, she teased. He chuckled. All right. Let us do it. They spent the next week preparing, stringing lights, setting tables, and decorating the lakeside with candles. It felt natural, almost like the old days when they used to plan charity events together. On the night of the fundraiser, neighbors filled the backyard with laughter and music. Harper wore a simple cream dress, her hair glowing under the warm light. Ethan could not take his eyes off her. Throughout the evening, guests congratulated them, not just for the event but for finding their way back. Harper would smile politely, but every time their eyes met, the warmth between them said everything words could not. Later, after the crowd left and the lake fell silent again, they stood together among the empty glasses and flickering candles. Do you ever think about how strange this is? She asked softly. We came here to be alone, to forget. Now look at us. Maybe forgetting was never the point, he said. Maybe we just needed the right kind of silence to listen again. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and for a while they just stood there, watching the reflections dance on the water. But peace never lasts forever. The following morning, Ethan received an email that shook him. One of his former partners, the man who had betrayed him years ago, had resurfaced, threatening to expose confidential documents from their old company unless Ethan withdrew his new project. It was blackmail, pure and simple. He sat at his desk, reading the message again and again, feeling the past claw its way back. Harper found him there hours later, pale and silent. What happened? She asked. He hesitated, then handed her the phone. She read, her expression hardening. He cannot do this to you again, Ethan. He already is, he said quietly. If this goes public, I lose everything. The investors, the new startup, maybe even this house. So what are you going to do? She asked. Pay him off? He shook his head. No. I am done hiding. I will face it, whatever it costs. Harper reached out, placing a hand on his arm. Then you will not face it alone. Their eyes met, steady and unshaken. In that moment, Ethan realized that the woman beside him was no longer the ghost of his past. She was his anchor, his truth. Whatever storm was coming next, they would face it together. The following days were a blur of tension and long nights. Ethan met with his lawyers, reviewed old contracts, and prepared to face the man who had tried to destroy him once before. Harper stayed by his side, her calm presence grounding him when everything else felt unstable. One evening, after hours of sorting through files, she said quietly, You cannot fight shadows with fear, Ethan. Tell the truth. That is what you always wanted to rebuild, but honestly this time. He looked at her, exhausted but resolute. You are right. I am done letting other people define my story. The next morning, Ethan stood before a small press gathering at his office, holding a folder in his hands. Cameras flashed, but this time he did not flinch. Years ago, mistakes were made under my name, he began, his voice firm. Some were mine, some were not. But I will not let lies or blackmail rewrite the truth. Everything you need to know is in these documents. I am not perfect, but I am not a fraud. He handed the folder to a journalist and stepped back. Harper watched from the corner, her heart pounding with pride. She knew how much this moment cost him. That night, the headlines changed again, but this time, they told a different story. Ethan Cole comes clean, integrity over image. The next day, messages flooded his inbox. Former colleagues reached out, investors voiced support, and even the man who had threatened him vanished into silence. The truth had done what fear never could. Ethan sat on the porch that evening, watching the lake shimmer in the fading light. Harper joined him, carrying 2 mugs of tea. So, she said softly, how does it feel to be free? He smiled, a tired but genuine smile. Strange. Peaceful. Like I finally stopped running. She took a sip, nodding. You did what you said you would, faced it, whatever it cost. And somehow, he said, looking at her, I did not lose everything. Not even close. The air between them grew warm again, full of quiet understanding. You know, Harper whispered, for someone who once thought love was a distraction, you have done a terrible job staying detached. He laughed, shaking his head. And for someone who swore she would never look back, you keep finding reasons to stay. She smiled, setting her cup down. Maybe we are both learning that running from pain only keeps us from finding peace. Ethan turned to her then, his hand brushing hers. Harper, he said softly, I do not want to start over. I want to continue from here. Her breath caught, eyes glimmering in the soft light. You mean that? More than anything, he said. I bought a house to forget you, remember? Now, it feels like every brick here is part of us. She laughed quietly, tears in her eyes. Maybe the house was never about forgetting. Maybe it was waiting for us to come home. The night deepened, the lake reflecting stars like scattered diamonds. As they sat there side by side, the past finally loosened its hold. For the first time in years, the silence between them was not empty, it was full of promise. Autumn came early that year, painting the lake with shades of gold and amber. The air carried the scent of pine and distant rain, and life at Lakeside finally felt whole again. Ethan's company had stabilized, rebuilt from the ashes with a new purpose, integrity before profit. Harper's novel, The House by the Lake, became a quiet success, praised for its honesty and depth. The irony was not lost on either of them, they had written their own ending, one day at a time. On a crisp Saturday morning, Harper stood by the water's edge, her sketchbook in hand, capturing the reflection of their two homes. She did not hear Ethan walk up behind her until he spoke. You are missing one detail, he said, his tone playful. She looked over her shoulder. Oh. And what is that? There is no fence anymore. He pointed to the space where the old wooden barrier once stood, now replaced by a shared garden blooming with autumn flowers. She smiled softly. I guess boundaries were overrated anyway. Ethan chuckled, then grew quiet. Harper, there is something I want to show you. He reached into his pocket and handed her a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully. It was the original neighbor contract, yellowed from months of weather and time. Across the bottom, new words were handwritten in his familiar script, no more pretending. No more separate lives. When she looked up, Ethan was already on one knee, holding a simple silver ring. The first time we signed a contract, I was scared of love. The second time, I was scared of losing it. This time, I am not afraid at all. Harper's eyes shimmered with tears, her hand trembling slightly as she covered her mouth. Ethan, you do not have to say anything, he said softly. Just know that I want every morning, every storm, every quiet evening by this lake with you. She let out a small laugh that sounded like both joy and disbelief. You really are terrible at staying ordinary, you know that? I learned from the best, he said, his voice warm. She nodded, tears spilling freely now. Yes, she whispered. Of course yes. The wind carried her words across the lake, scattering them like petals. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand steady, his heart full. They stood together, the lake glimmering behind them, the garden swaying gently in the breeze. Later, when the sun began to set, Harper leaned her head against his shoulder and whispered, You bought a house to forget me, but you built a home to remember us. Ethan smiled, kissing her forehead. Best mistake I ever made. As the last light of day touched the water, their reflection merged into one, two lives rebuilt not by perfection, but by forgiveness, courage, and love that refused to quit. And so ended the story that began with distance and misunderstanding, and found its way home again. Because sometimes, love does not need to start over, it just needs to come back wiser.